If you are looking for your first yo-yo, or maybe you already have a yo-yo and it's not working out so good, so you're looking for a new first yo-yo, unfortunately, you are in for a world of confusion. Because whether you go on YouTube or Google it, what you're going to find is a whole bunch of lists, and all of those lists will have almost no yo-yos in common. And so in this video, I am going to give you our own list, but I'm going to do something none of those other lists do. I am going to teach you the set of qualities that make a great beginner yo-yo. Now, I have taught so many people how to yo-yo in person and perhaps millions of people online, and so we know exactly what it takes to make the best beginner yo-yo. And so whether you can get the yo-yos that I'm going to recommend in this video or whether you need to go somewhere else, at least you'll know the set of qualities to look for so that you can have a great start to your own yo-yo journey. Now, if you're watching a video like this, you may want to consider downloading our free app for Apple, Android, or Amazon devices. In this app, you can learn over 350 different tricks. All the tricks are arranged by difficulty, so it's easy to find tricks that you can learn, and you can keep track of your progress, and it also allows you to level up as you gain new skills, which just makes it a whole lot more fun. Now, everybody who sells online knows that everybody's looking for a good beginner yo-yo, and so a lot of people, they just slap the label beginner onto any yo-yo that they can because they know that that will help the yo-yo sell better, whether or not it's actually good for beginners at all. And so when you're looking for a good beginner yo-yo on a store like Amazon, it can be really difficult to tell exactly what you're getting. So let's just start by talking about what a beginner yo-yo is. Now, if you were to look at all the different kinds of shapes and things that yo-yos can do, basically yo-yos break down into 5 different types. Now, it's not going to be that complicated because we're going to eliminate 2 right away. But if you look at these, you can see that they're different in size. You can see that they're different in shape. And that's because each of the different types of yo-yos kind of helps you do a certain set of tricks. If we look at the very first type, you can see that it's different than all the others because it is a very narrow shape. It's very rounded. A lot of people think this is a beginner yo-yo. This is actually designed for two-handed play, where you yo-yo with 2 yo-yos at once. It is designed to do what are called looping tricks and around the world tricks. So if you see a yo-yo of this shape that's marketed as a beginner yo-yo, just know that it's not going to be your top tier option because it's really designed for something else. And then on the other side of the spectrum, we have this enormous yo-yo, and this yo-yo is designed for off-string yo-yo tricks. That's right, where the string is not even attached to the yo-yo. So that leaves us with these 3 yo-yos in the middle. Now, all 3 of these yo-yos are for what I would call conventional style yo-yoing. That means that you're using one yo-yo at a time, the string is attached to your yo-yo, and the same string is attached to your hand. And so what is it about these 3 that makes them different, and can we look at these and figure out what is it that makes a beginner yo-yo great for beginners? Now, first, of course, you have beginner yo-yos, and we'll be talking about those in this video. So let's move on to the third type, which we might call kind of standard yo-yos now, or advanced yo-yos, or unresponsive yo-yos. Now, they're called unresponsive because even though all these kinds of yo-yos can sleep, unresponsive yo-yos do not come back up when you pull on them. And yeah, you heard me right. They are designed to not come back up. And the reason is that when you get into advanced yo-yoing, the tricks become way more difficult. And so by having the yo-yo not accidentally snap back to you at any given time, then it makes those tricks a whole lot easier to learn, and then you can call the yo-yo back to you with a trick called a bind. Now, you can imagine if this is your first yo-yo, in order to get the yo-yo back, you have to learn another trick, a trick where you get the yo-yo on the string. That makes it way, way harder to get started, and yet, if you go on to some stores, they're going to call some of these advanced unresponsive yo-yos beginner yo-yos, and that is just not helpful. Now, between a beginner yo-yo and these advanced yo-yos, there's what we call starter yo-yos. And these are yo-yos, they come with a slim bearing, which allows them to play more like a beginner yo-yo. They come back up real easy. Maybe not as easy as a beginner yo-yo, but still easier than an unresponsive yo-yo. But then you can swap out the bearing so that the same yo-yo will play like an unresponsive yo-yo. And these yo-yos are very good for transitioning from kind of the basics into advanced style play. And so on our store, we try to make this very, very easy for you to know exactly what type of yo-yo you're getting. We have beginner yo-yos, we have starter yo-yos, and then for these advanced or unresponsive yo-yos, we just call them 1A string trick yo-yos, and they're very clearly delineated. That way you know exactly what you're getting all the time. Now, before I get into more of the specific qualities and characteristics that you should look for when you're getting your first yo-yo, you might be thinking, wow, it would be kind of nice to have one of each of these so that as I get better, I have exactly the right yo-yo. Well, you're in luck because we have just put together a pack that has our top recommended beginner yo-yo, starter yo-yo, and unresponsive yo-yo all in one pack. And the unresponsive yo-yo is a 2-time world record holder for longest spinning DNA. So that kind of gives you a sense of what these yo-yos are capable of. And so if you want to get them all in one pack, that is now available and really easy. So as we begin to consider the qualities that make a great beginner yo-yo, I do want to say something that I think at this point should probably be pretty obvious, and that is that among the yo-yos I'm going to be recommending, I am going to be recommending our own yo-yo that we have for beginners, which is the Fizz. And of course, this makes sense. If we didn't think that this yo-yo was the best beginner yo-yo, we would make a new one. In fact, this is exactly what we did with our flagship model, the Sage. When DNA became popular, we redesigned it so it could do finger spins, but we pretty much improved every aspect of the yo-yo. But for the Fizz, we don't really feel the need to change it because we still think it's exactly what a beginner yo-yo should be. But I don't want you to just depend on our recommendation, so I'm going to take 2 of the best-selling, the most widely available, the best performing beginner yo-yos, and compare them to the Fizz. And the point isn't exactly to show which one is the best, it's more to see which qualities do all 3 have in common, and which qualities do 2 of the 3 have in common, so that we can kind of piece together by comparing these what qualities make an excellent beginner yo-yo. So let's start with the things all 3 yo-yos have in common. First, they're all made out of plastic. And you definitely want your first yo-yo to be made out of plastic because you're going to hit it on the ground, you're going to hit it on stuff around your house, you might even hit some other people. And that's just because you don't have as much control when you're getting started. Now, these metal yo-yos that are called beginner yo-yos, they look awesome, but they're going to get dinged up. Sometimes when they get dinged, then they can actually cut you, so you need to sand down the rough edges. It's just not a good idea. And the metal yo-yos, typically they're not beginner yo-yos, they're starter yo-yos. So they're not even really designed to be your first yo-yo, even though that's what people are calling them. And so on a lot of different fronts, it's just better to go with plastic. Second, all 3 of these yo-yos have a similar width. They are more narrow than a starter yo-yo like the Sage, but they are wider than a looping yo-yo like the Oracle. And this is actually by design. By having a yo-yo that's not super wide, it's easier to fit in your pocket, which is great when you're first learning tricks. And because the width is more like a looping yo-yo, you can actually learn some of the early looping tricks, like loop-the-loop, and especially hop the fence, where you throw the yo-yo down, it comes back up, and then immediately you loop it around. Those are some of the first tricks that most people like to learn when they get a yo-yo. So by having a yo-yo that's just a little bit more narrow, you get access to some of those looping tricks. Now, to balance this out, third, all 3 also have a flared shape that goes out from the center. The flared shape gives you access to your early string tricks, and this is where you land the yo-yo on the string, and that's because no matter where you touch the yo-yo with the string is going to feed into the center of the yo-yo. So you've got the full width of the yo-yo feeding it in so that you can learn those string tricks a little bit easier. You can definitely learn all the basic tricks, see if you like that style of yo-yoing, and then you can move on. But at the same time, you can still learn some of your basic looping tricks. And so with this particular pairing of having a more narrow shape that is flared out, you get kind of the best of both worlds, where you get to experiment with a lot of different types of tricks, and that can be a guide for what types of tricks you want to learn as you move forward and what types of yo-yos you can get next. Fourth, all of these yo-yos can be unscrewed and then reassembled basically as many times as you want. When you are a new player, you get knots. You get lots of knots. And there are less expensive yo-yos that don't come apart. And so the first time you get a knot, you are going to be spending a whole lot of time getting that string out of the gap if you ever get it out. And so it's nice to have a yo-yo that comes apart. Fifth, all of these yo-yos have a bearing of some sort. Now, the bearings in them are different, and we'll talk about those, but it is very, very nice to have some sort of free spinning axle, whatever the type. And that is because a free spinning axle will allow your yo-yo to spin at the bottom of the string. It will allow it to sleep for 3 to 5 times longer than an old school yo-yo that just has a fixed axle that doesn't spin. And if the yo-yo is spinning longer, you have longer to practice your tricks. You can do more tricks. It is just better. And so you definitely want a yo-yo with some sort of free spinning axle. So those 5 things, I would consider those to be kind of the non-negotiables when it comes to getting a beginner yo-yo. But there are 4 more things, and these are kind of get them if you can. And so the first, if you look at these three yo-yos, you'll see that two of them have a metal ball bearing axle and one has a trans axle. And you do get a couple of advantages that are significant from the ball bearing. First of all, they do tend to spin a little bit longer, but even more than that, when you get the yo-yo onto the string, they play significantly smoother, which means that you can learn a lot more of your string tricks, even though this is just a beginner yo-yo. And so if you have a plastic trans axle, on the string, they play just a little bit chunky. And so it'll be more difficult to learn your tricks in general, and you definitely won't be able to go nearly as far. And so if you can get a metal ball bearing, that's the way to go. Seventh, and this one might seem counterintuitive, but you'll see it actually makes a lot of sense. If you look at two of these yo-yos, the free spinning axle they have is very small, and on the third one, it's much larger. Now, when you get into more advanced yo-yos, almost all the bearings are larger. So why wouldn't you want that with a beginner yo-yo? Well, beginner yo-yos and looping yo-yos actually tend to use shorter strings because they're a lot easier to control, especially if you're a beginner. And so having a smaller bearing for the string to wrap around means that you get more wraps around the bearing, and those wraps are going to be a lot tighter, which means that you'll get more power and more consistency out of your throw. And when you're trying to master those basics, like just getting the yo-yo down, getting it spinning, that is a pretty significant advantage. And this is probably one of the main downsides of starting with a starter yo-yo, is that they all have a tall, a larger, slim bearing. Now, for our Sage yo-yo, we compensate for this by having response pads that actually come out from the side of the yo-yo a little bit to give you a lot more of that grip to make it feel more like a beginner yo-yo when you're in this kind of beginner mode. But almost no other starter yo-yos do that. And so you're kind of left with the weaknesses of a large bearing right when you need the most help, which is in kind of the beginner phase of your journey. And so if you're going to look at a beginner yo-yo, definitely try to find one with a smaller bearing. Eighth, since you're trying to find a yo-yo that blends some of the qualities of a looping yo-yo with the qualities of a string trick yo-yo, it's nice to have a yo-yo where the walls don't go directly out from the center of the yo-yo, but actually go up a little bit and then flare out. And the reason for this is it does look a little bit more like a looping yo-yo, and that actually allows the yo-yo to loop quite a bit easier. And so, again, it just gives you a little bit more of the flexibility so that you can loop some more. It still has the flared shape so that you can do string tricks some more, and it kind of balances everything out so that you can get a taste of all the different types of tricks. And then from there, you can decide which yo-yos do you want to get next to kind of specialize in a certain type of trick. Ninth, and this one is also a little bit counterintuitive, it is better to have a yo-yo design that is a little bit taller. And if you were to look at the original picture that I showed you of the 5 yo-yos, you might notice that the second tallest yo-yo is the beginner yo-yo. And this is by design. When I was first teaching new people how to yo-yo in person, I thought because it was a lot of younger people that a smaller yo-yo would be better, because a smaller yo-yo might fit in your hand easier. And it turned out that that is completely backwards, actually. A taller yo-yo is much easier to manage and control, even for small hands. And we actually see this in other spaces as well. When your kids are first learning how to color or to draw, we'll have pencils that are a little bit fatter. You also have crayons that are quite a bit fatter than regular crayons. And the reason we do this, it has to do with dexterity. It's a little bit easier to grab onto something larger, and then once you are more dexterous, then you go down to a smaller size. And so in terms of theory, but also in terms of practice, we've just seen that a taller yo-yo seems to be a little bit easier to manage. And there's an added benefit that the taller a yo-yo is, the longer it spins because of the weight distribution. And so you get a couple of perks with that. And again, this is something that you're going to see in 2 of these yo-yos, not all 3, but if you can get it, it is a nice benefit. So those are the 9 things that we would recommend looking for when you are getting your own beginner yo-yo. Of course, we highly recommend our own Fizz yo-yo. And in fact, if you want to get 2 Fizz yo-yos, then you can get the Screen Time Yo-Yo Challenge Pack, which also comes with a little card with the first 10 tricks that you should learn on it. But by having 2 yo-yos, you and a friend or a parent and a child can learn the tricks together. And the idea is to convert your time spent on your screens into a real-world activity like yo-yoing, which is simply better. Now, another thing that you might want to consider is, instead of getting one yo-yo that is kind of in between looping and string tricks, you might just want to go ahead and get a yo-yo devoted to each of those styles. And so we have actually put together what we call the First 50 Yo-Yo Tricks pack. And instead of having a beginner yo-yo, you just go right for your dedicated string trick yo-yo. In this case, it would be our favorite starter yo-yo, the Sage. And again, that has those elevated response pads so that when it's in beginner mode, it plays a little bit tighter like a beginner yo-yo will, but it can be upgraded to do the more advanced string tricks as well as DNA. And of course, it also comes with 2 of our favorite beginner looping yo-yos, the Oracle, so that you can have yo-yos devoted specifically to those tricks. And that's a good way if you want to kind of speed up your process at the beginning, then you have all the tools right at your disposal. Now, if you want to just go straight down the line with your string tricks, we also mentioned our Ultimate Beginner Yo-Yo Pack that has our first beginner yo-yo, our starter yo-yo, and then unresponsive yo-yo that we would recommend. And so you've got a lot of great options.